Good evening and welcome to the bunker of the Stowe Town Building for the March 15th rescheduled Board of Selectmen meeting, rescheduled from Tuesday night. And start off as always with public input. Is there anyone here with public input on a matter that will not be covered in the agenda tonight? If it is covered in the agenda, we'll hear you then. But we're always willing to hear people's thoughts about the town. Okay, then we'll move on to chair's comments. First, I would like to thank especially my colleagues and the board staff for all the work they did rescheduling tonight's meeting because we could not meet on Tuesday night. It was difficult. I greatly appreciate my colleagues to my right and my left for being here tonight so that we can have a quorum. It's not something that we could have put off till we could have skipped the meeting, and it looks like if we wanted to schedule for next Tuesday night, we would have weather problems again. So again, thank you to everyone who made this possible. And I also want to give in the colloquial, a shout out to our public safety people, our highway department. And I'm sure Mr. Ryan has briefed himself on the activities. I'll turn this portion of the agenda over to him to single out everyone who was so very helpful, including the town administrator.
I was just a ride-along, sat at some meetings and
Well,
moral support. They wouldn't let me out to try to piece up a tree. They just didn't trust me with my...
No. As I was there at the meeting, thank you for informing me. I don't think I added much other than to apologize to everyone that I wasn't Mr. Ryan. But it was a very, I think, helpful meeting. My daughter, I brought my daughter because she was home from school, and she helped out at the warming session. And one last thing I want to make public, and we need to get this out to people, is that for disruptions in the order of magnitude that we experienced last week with electric power and so on, the place where we have a warming station, where we have charging for people's cell phones, is going to be at the community center. If there are serious disruptions, we might go back to the emergency center at Center School, but for the kinds of brief interruptions where there's no threat to life or limb, we'll be focusing our outreach through the Stowe Community Center, our new Stowe Community Center, and it worked out very well. But Mr. Ryan, do you care to add anything?
Well, one thing, I think I'm going to go along with your warming center, and if anybody during a power outage like that does need to get there, what they should do is they should call the police department on their business line. You know, trying to get to a warming center, if somebody's out of power, or, what they should be doing is they can call the police department to find out if the warming center is open to begin with, and if all they're trying to do is get there because they don't have power, they'll try to, I'm sure the police will try to help them out the best they can in any kind of emergency. If it is an emergency or a medical emergency, they should just dial 911. But trying to get to a shelter is really not considered an emergency. And during power outages like that, there can be a lot of emergencies, so that what they'll do is they'll get to you as soon as they can.
Yes, the Stowe Community Center's not, Mr. Town Administrator, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's not set up to be an emergency shelter, but it is a very useful warming center. And
It's not set up for that purpose, but it has one critical piece of equipment, which is a generator. And so it can serve at any time for a shelter or not, depending on what public, I leave those calls to
Right.
MRC and the public safety folks, but it's set up perfectly well for it.
Well, and that's it. And one of the other things, actually, in talking to Chief Landry, is his view is that would be the primary shelter, because the MRC trailer's already there, it just happens to be in the back room. So they've, rather than, in the past, what they had to do was go and open a school, make arrangements to open the school, get the trailer over there, get cots, things like that. Right now, it's all at the fire station, and actually, the chief can open an emergency shelter on very, very short notice because all the equipment's there.
So-
And they do have the generator, so they have water, electricity, heat, the whole thing.
I apologize for interrupting you, Mr. Ryan. So I think we need to think about is getting word out to the community, and the press is very helpful in that regard. We need to get word out to the community that if their people experience power outages, if they need to be warm because their heater is broke down, if they need a lunch, my daughter helped out, as I said, in a volunteer lunch at the East Hill Community Center, they should go to the community center first. And we gotta let people know that is available. But we'll talk about getting that out, that information out, unfortunately, not before next Tuesday. One last thing, you finished, Mr. Ryan, or do you want to commend the
Well, that's it. The police, fire, highway, the MRC, they all did a great job. And I was talking to Chief Landry earlier today, and, they worked very, very well together. We're going to be hopefully appointing some new firefighters tonight. Those guys were out and active during this also, even as apprentices, and I guess they have been very active since they started. And because of the crew that they have at the fire department now, they were actually out helping highway when they needed it, police when they needed it, and they were all in communication and working very well together, so.
If I could just add, some of us subscribe to the police incident reports, which are public information, you can get emailed to you, and wow, I mean, they were going nonstop for a day and a half, and it was just pages of incidents, trees falling on emergency vehicles, and it was.
Command cars.
Yeah, certain individuals, command cars taking a certain amount of damage. Just want to commend everybody and say thank you.
Yes, we're all very grateful, and I also think that the Hudson Light and Power does a good job on their Twitter feed. I don't know if you can access their Twitter feed, but they give you a very current recitation of what areas of the town they're working on to restore power. So that's another thing we need to get out, but that's a matter for another day to do that in a more organized and concerted effort.
I should have thanked Hudson Light and Power too. They are, during an incident like that, they're an integral part of the team that keeps the lights on or gets things fixed. And they also work very well with the police, fire, and highway department to make sure that things get fixed in an expeditious manner, and they're in constant contact with the highway department and with our other emergency management folks.
And I know you're not here, Chief, for that purpose, but is there anything you'd like to add about what you observed and how things worked last week?
The only thing I'd add is that it worked. It was organized chaos, I would consider it initially, which is what's gonna happen. But it's just reiterating what everybody said. The system came together and a lot of work was put into it, and by every person that was out on the street, and as well as keeping everybody informed within the loop, including the residents. I think it went as well as it could have.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, people. Thanks for coordinating that. And now, just briefly, I would like to mention that we've received notice that a Stowe senior at the Neshoba Regional High School, Andrew Kerbel, was a finalist in the Prudential Spirit of Community Awards. He was singled out for leading a class of first graders in a 2-week project to collect books from their personal libraries then donate them to children living in a homeless center. After guiding discussions about the importance of books and how some kids might not have access to them, Andrew helped the children write letters to their parents explaining what they wanted to do. Students ended up donating 150 books, which Andrew delivered to the shelter, Abby's house. So we're very grateful and proud of Andrew Kerbel. All right, is there anything in correspondence that my colleagues would like to bring to our attention at this point? Okay, we have no minutes, so that brings us to discussion and vote on an appointment to SpringFest Committee. The candidate is not able to attend because of the rescheduled date, but we've seen the materials in the packet, and there are, the SpringFest Committee is recommending her appointment. Any of my colleagues have any thoughts or comments?
I think motion's in order, probably.
I have a question. Does anyone wanna, hoping not butcher her last name, does anyone have any clue? Jusain? I'm gonna say Jusain. Neither of you
Chestnut,
ladies.
yeah, Chestnut. Why don't you,
On the recommendation of members of the SpringFest Committee, I move to appoint Sherry Jusain as a member of the SpringFest Committee to complete an unexpired 2-year term expiring June 30th, 2018.
Second.
we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion, except about how to pronounce her name? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Aye. And our administrative assistant will be watching the videotape of this so that she'll be able to record the votes, because she appreciates that we're a little shorthanded tonight. So that for her benefit is unanimous. Now we have a discussion and a vote regarding the appointment of call firefighters. We also have the materials in the packet, and we've had a chance to review them. And the chief, who I thought was not going to be able to attend, is able to attend. And why don't you come forward, chief, and introduce this agenda item.
Yeah, this is the firefighters that were appointed this fiscal year, but early last fall. A number of them were not call firefighter ready because of we run them through our apprentice program, which is these gentlemen right here. They've been extremely engaged in the department since they've been appointed originally. They went through an extremely comprehensive program that we've vetted out over the years and designed, and it was culminated just about 3 weeks ago by a perfect opportunity that the Acton Fire Department offered a shared training of a house that was being destroyed over in Acton, and we ended up, Stowe Fire had 14 attendees go to it, and these gentlemen this is their kind of their final stage of it, and they were introduced with live fire conditions in some of the best ways you could ever put these people to, even better than the fire academy, because it's an actual house, it's not a big concrete building. And they've all done very well, they're very active, they're very engaged, and it's been one of our best groups in my tenure at least that we've brought forward.
That's great. Do my colleagues have any questions or comments?
I was just gonna say, I talked to the chief earlier today. I think one thing that's impressive about this group of 6 is that 6 started, 6 finished. So it's a good group went in, and as the chief told me earlier today, and he just said it again, that they've been very engaged, and sometimes you get a group that they'll come, they'll finish up their stuff, and then you might see them on occasion, but it sounds like you've got a good batch here, and I believe you said that some of these guys were even out during the storm, weren't they?
Yeah, majority of these were instrumental in cutting trees while the storm was going on, running around with our crews, so they were a good group so far.
So,
That's great. Anything else?
I'm just grateful we continue to be able to find people who want to be call firefighters.
mhm.
I guess it's a first step on the ladder up to being a firefighter, but it's a system that,
Yeah,
it seems in the long run might be
it's a slowly dying system, but I will say, the captain and I were going through numbers, and this last 6 months, with the records that we've been able to pull, we have our highest returning call firefighters per call on average
That's good,
than we've had we look back 6 years.
yeah,
So something's working right now.
that's good.
We just keep on rolling.
That's good to know.
Who's your call lieutenant again?
I have 4 callers.
Phone call.
Captain Bloom is the one that I was working with, but we have 4 call lieutenants that actually oversee their own group. They each have so many members that are theirs, and then we have the one call training lieutenant, Barry Evers.
That's what,
Yeah, he's the training lieutenant.
yeah.
And that's a position that we just put in about a year, or you
Yeah,
put in
little
about
over
a year ago.
And that's
Right.
all of this kind of falls into recruitment, retention,
Right.
engagement. They all have a very, very big piece in it now,
They're gonna feel
something we
valued.
haven't
Yeah.
in a long time, so.
Well, certainly you and your administrative staff deserve credit for that too. And we have reviewed the application materials. One thought about that though, as I understand it, under the new open meeting law, application materials are privileged. They're not public record. So I would ask our administrative assistant, when she's looking into, segregate that out from the public record. Application materials are, for employment in the town are not public record. I mean, we appreciate reviewing them, it supplements, not that it's necessary to
Yep.
supplement your excellent judgment and recommendations. But, you know, we'd like to see them, but they shouldn't be included in the record.
Okay.
Yep, I actually think that all we got was the letter, and.
Oh, I saw some,
No, we got, and Brian's right, and the best way to keep it private is not to talk about it, because then it doesn't become, but you're right.
I don't plan to talk about it.
Yeah, but you're right, we keep it out of the packet.
Okay.
We're not talking about it anymore anyway.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
we're not talking about
It's
it,
the
we're just
third
talking about.
meeting we've had discussing what we're not going to discuss.
But we're not, we're just talking about the existence, we're not talking about the actual application materials.
So-
In any event,
Would like a motion, Mr. Chairman?
yes, I would, before I get myself into further trouble, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, on the recommendation of Stowe Fire Chief Joe Landry, I move to appoint the following people as call firefighters to the Stowe Fire Department for a one-year term expiring June 30th, 2018, and subject to reappointment thereafter. Kevin Shepherd, Matthew Lowe, Jonathan Baharo, Uris Mangolds, Seamus Minton, Matthew Tufo.
Second.
Thank you very much for trying that with great courage. Did we get the names pronounced mostly correctly?
Yuri.
Yuri.
All right,
Yes.
seeing no further
Call it
questions.
Uris from now on.
Seeing no further questions or comments, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Again, for our administrative assistant, that was unanimous. Thank you, Chief,
Thank you very much.
and thank you for everything.
Thank you for all your support.
Now, we also have a Highway Department new hire. And is this something you're comfortable in leading us in, Mr. Ryan? Because I understand Mr. Clayton and the applicant will not attend. Or do you want to carry this one, Mr. Town Administrator?
Well,
I ended up speaking to Mike Clayton today about this. Basically, he's got, one person who's been out on workman's comp, and I think he's planning on retiring. So he's looking to replace, the person, get him back up to full strength. And so therefore, they ended up, posting the position. As usual, a number of applicants weren't even beginning to be qualified. They had 2 qualified people that came in and lost one of them 2 days or a couple days before they were ready to do this, got hired somewhere else. And this gentleman here is actually somebody local to Stowe, has strong ties, and according to, he's going to need some training, but the thing is, he's used to working with a chainsaw. He's in the process of getting his CDL, which is a requirement. He's already got his, what do you call it, learner's permit. He's used to doing tree work, and Mike feels he's gonna be a good fit once he gets trained up. So it's, you know, he's a hard worker, and he's looking forward to it. So it is getting tougher and tougher to find people that are willing to work the kind of hours that somebody on the highway department does work. So it's great that we've got somebody that's local, and Mike strongly recommends that we do him. He's the best candidate we've got right now.
Anything to add, Mr.
It's important to
Thomas?
note that he has a welding certificate
Yeah.
too, which is rather important in the work that we do. I've talked to several in the department who I respect, and he's a can-do guy, and at 29, you know, willing to get his CDL, having his welding certificate, and being known closely by several members as a hard-working, you know, can-do person. I'll take those and we can train him up.
Well, once again, we're always grateful to the town administrator's input, but especially to our colleague, Mr. Ryan's input, for contacting the chiefs of the various public works and public safety, so that we can get personal input on these decisions. Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
May I ask one question?
I was gonna say, any questions or comments?
He is being, I have no questions about his qualifications. He's being hired to replace an individual, obviously whose name I don't want to mention, who's on workers' comp and seeking disability retirement. The problem in situations like that is that you have to typically have to hold the position open because maybe they won't get the disability retirement, maybe a couple, and we're confident, we're at a point where we're confident that individual will not be returning.
Well, to the extent that I was getting harassed by our insurer for months, we're well past that. He can't come back if he wanted to.
Okay.
So we waited longer than I think would be a reasonable period of time at our own disadvantage.
Okay, I just wanted to ask.
If the gentleman comes back, we'll have to deal with it then, but
All right.
I've
It's always
admitted he's a man, sorry.
It's always a very awkward situation. You want a motion, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, if you please, Mrs. Alvey.
Mr. Chairman, on the recommendation of Highway Superintendent Mike Clayton, I move to authorize the town administrator to hire Nicolo Antonelli as truck driver laborer for the Stowe Highway Department.
Second.
Moved and seconded, no further questions or comments, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Now, the town clerk is here with an item regarding an addition to the town election ballot. Madam Clerk?
Yes. After I was here a while ago with the election information, we realized that we had a vacancy on the library trustee for a one-year unexpired term. And so that needs to go on the ballot, and the selectmen need to put that on the ballot.
I don't think it's germane to your request, but in the correspondence, we have an applicant to fill that space on an interim basis.
Because we had posted when became vacant, it had been vacant for a while. And then it just kind of slipped my mind that it was an elected position that we need to put on the ballot. That's why I missed it back.
No, I wasn't looking for an
Yeah.
apology or a mea culpa. I was just pointing out, is this, you know, I asked my colleagues, is this something, do we need a so-called recess appointment or an appointment?
I think I can address that. So, the library trustees, their most recent minutes reflected that they were going to seek a joint meeting with the selectmen to appoint the individual who's gonna run on an interim basis. I checked with the selectmen's office, they hadn't actually requested that as of that time. Later that same day, the chair of the library trustees came in and apparently made that request, Mr. Chairman. So I think as of this past Monday, they have indeed requested, oh, in fact, you responded to it. They have indeed requested a joint meeting with us that you reasonably said we could not do this Thursday, maybe the last meeting in March.
Which you will not be there, and I'm very
Oh, sure.
I think we'll feel your loss and your input
Yeah, yeah.
sorely.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
So when
We
the
can
position,
Skype you.
so when the position was first posted to have an applicant to be appointed, I mean, we were months out, 6 or more months before the election. Now we're, 6 weeks away?
Yeah. But they requested it.
Yeah.
And and again, I don't mean to hold you up on this, but it's your,
Yeah.
it's your thought we should have that meeting? Joint
Well,
meeting?
I don't see why not. I mean, Linda's right. I think if we didn't, the world would not come to an end. But they requested it. The mechanics of the Board of Library Trustees are complicated. And maybe if there is some advantage to having them be up to full speed as soon as possible.
The only thing I can think of is if they're unable to make a quorum, and I don't know how many meetings between now and May. 'Cause it-
That's a good point. 2 of their trustees currently are experiencing some personal difficulties that have made it difficult for them to attend meetings.
So they're a 7-member board, they down to 4. That's their quorum.
All right, then we won't delay. I've made a note to put this on for our
Another
next
time,
meeting.
sure.
And we're grateful for your input, Mr. Salvi. In fact, we're grateful for the diligent liaisoning that both of you have been doing.
He wants something.
I know, huh?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I'll find out later. There's some
Yeah.
favor he needs.
Yeah,
No,
but
that's
I just want to make sure you get that vacancy on the ballot, because then I can,
But if there are no further questions or comments, and I think you've explained yourself fully, in fact, you've added to our discussion, so we can agenda the next meeting, I will take a motion from Mr. Salvi.
Mr. Chairman, I move to add the following position to the ballot for the May 2018 town election, Randall Library trustee for the remainder of a 3-year term expiring in May 2019.
Second.
Seeing no further questions or comments, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 That's unanimous. Thank you.
so I would take this minute to just say the nomination papers for any of the positions. I think we have someone for every position now, so there's no contested races, but every possible vacancy will have a candidate, I think. But papers can be taken out until March 23rd, have to be turned in by the 27th, and then we'll get them certified and on the ballot, so we're gearing up for elections.
And you will handle them in your usual efficient and
And we're very excited about it.
organized fashion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Sure.
Now, the next item is a discussion of a change of the date for the special liquor license for the Neshoba Regional High School After Prom Committee fundraiser. And as you're sure to note, this is a retroactive licensing. And, the reasons are that the old date was no good. The sponsors of this event contacted me, and I said, we'll put it on the agenda for Tuesday night, 13th. That way you can have your event on the 14th, and we canceled the meeting on Tuesday night because we couldn't have it. So with that in mind, and the sin or crime will be on my shoulders, I told them to have the event and that we would approve the liquor license retroactively. If you've got problems with it, it's my decision, yell at me. But
I think that was the right thing to do.
we had already approved the license. We were just looking to fix a date to it. And we can do that tonight, even though it's retroactively.
If I felt like extending the meeting, I'd pick on you a little bit, but I think you did the right thing, so how's that?
Were there, anything untoward happened at the,
Actually,
Event?
the value here is that it validates and closes out the fact that you did approve it. So were there anything to subsequently occur, they were validly permitted.
Thank you. Then I will take a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to modify the previously approved special one-day liquor license for the Neshoba Regional High School After Prom Committee fundraising event at the Stowe Town Hall. Was it the Town Hall, or was it
Yeah.
Pop-Up?
No, it was a pump.
moved.
It was moved to town hall?
We'll start over again. Mr. Chairman, I move to modify the previously approved special one-day liquor license for the Neshoba Regional High School After-Prom Committee fundraising event at the Stowe Town Hall and sign a new special one-day liquor license approving the event for Wednesday, March 14, 2018, between 6:30 and 9:30 p.m., with Julie Fish and Maureen Hogan being responsible for the event and liquor distribution.
Second.
Thank you. I was coming home from the Boy Scout Charter dinner, and I was wondering what was going on at the town hall.
That was because the public forum was at the function hall, or at the community center, so they had to move down here because they had to reschedule.
Too many gatherings, not enough facilities.
There was a lot of stuff at Pompano last night.
Yes, the police academy, which is a
Police academy.
great thing.
That sounded like fun. They had paintball guns. I'm signing up.
Yeah.
I'll let you borrow mine.
No, it wasn't shooting at people.
What was the public forum on?
I'm gonna cover it in liaison. It was,
Thank you. Never mind.
it was complete streets.
I'm sorry I missed that, but can't be everywhere. Anyway, there has been a motion, it has been seconded. Seeing no questions or comments, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And this will require signatures. Thank you, and thank you for not recriminating me. Now we have a very pleasant,
All digital.
never met an attorney who was always without a pen.
All digital. 21st century.
Do you have to sign two?
Do you have to sign both?
Oh, I guess not.
But
Those,
Now you
Somebody
signed that
did.
one
Let's
twice.
hope so, you signed it.
Take a look. I thought this was
I thought
the,
those were original.
this was
I
the
thought-
prior license.
It's only a problem
See, it
if you
was
don't have
already
enough
signed.
signatures, you can
I
have.
thought that didn't look like a copy. Oh, well.
Thank you anyway for your
See my
diligence and
favorite
salvage.
Is that stuff all in here?
Can I have my pen back? Thank you.
Yes.
You can put that back in there. Now, as I said, this brings us to a very pleasant agenda item. We have the certificates for recognition of two Eagle Scouts, Eli Bachtell and Garrett Magnussen. The candidates will be having their Eagle Scout Court of Honors on March 24th. I will attend, and I will distribute the board's certificates, assuming they were approved. I see no reason why they wouldn't. Does anyone want to say anything about this matter that's on for a vote?
I'm just continuously amazed that Troop One keeps turning out the number of Eagle Scouts that they do. I think they've got one of the highest numbers, you know, for a troop their size and possibly any size around. I think they've surpassed 100 Eagle Scouts at this point since
No,
they've
it's
done
80,
it. Is it 80?
85, 86, 86, around in the 80s if I'm not mistaken.
But, you know, just in the last 10 years, I'd say there's probably been 30 or 40 of them. You know, this is like a regular occurrence at this point, and I think, you know,
And we
Troop
did-
One does a great job doing that, and they turn out fine young men.
And the town has a lot of capital projects done this way. There's a bridge on Captain Sergeant Land, there's Magazoo's Landing, there's a kiosk at Track Road, and probably a lot of other stuff I can't think of right now.
And,
You have
yeah.
Eagle Scouts.
Yep, and, you know, our former colleague, Gary Bernclove, and then our fire captain, J.P. Benoit, they put in an awful lot of time, as well as all the parents that are associated with them. So kudos to Troop One.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, you want a motion?
Yes, please, and then I might say a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, I move to recognize Boy Scouts Eli Bachtell and Garrett Magnussen for achieving the rank of Eagle Scout and to sign and authorize board member Brian Burke to present the letters and proclamations at Eli and Garrett's recognition ceremony on Saturday, March 24th, 2018.
Second.
And then, just before we vote, I just would like to bring to the attention, I don't know if people can see it, this is Eli Bachtell's project. He built these great picnic tables for the, I don't know, they can focus in on this. Great picnic tables for Pine Point, and Garrett did just an amazing job creating a table and patio for the Plantation Apartments. I mean, it's just, the young man is 18. I couldn't do this if I practiced for 20 years. So, again, I know the men, I know these young men personally, and I know their families. They've made wonderful contributions to the town, not including, but including this, their Eagle Scout projects. Then I will call for a vote on the motions. I think we can handle them jointly. Did we make that motion jointly?
I made the motion jointly, and I think you had a second, right, Mr. Ryan?
Yes, Mr. Ryan had the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous. And
He's got me.
I'm sorry?
I'm all set. I don't need to worry.
I get that.
No, no, no.
You know what, I think I will ask our administrative assistant to try and contact our missing members to see if they can come in and sign. So it doesn't look like there were only 3.
Oh, it was unanimous.
It was unanimous, and I'm sure they can see that, and, but I just wanna make sure that,
I think
if
that's
the.
a nice touch, Brian.
Well, thank you very much. Now, this brings us to an item that Mr. Ryan wanted me to put on for tonight. It's not on for a vote, it's, despite what the agenda says. But there are some questions facing the town at the, over the course of the next few months about the new commercial marijuana regulations and articles. And Mr. Ryan, very foresightfully and proactively, I hate that word, but proactively, wanted to set up or help set up a work group with Jesse Stebbins, our town planner, to make sure that the town of Stowe knew our options with respect to implementation of the plebiscite or last year, and to, or actually in 2016, and to determine whether we should present those options to the town. And Mr. Ryan, and I think quite correctly, said that we should at least get started tonight to review those options, so we'd be better able to discuss them and then vote on them at our next meeting. Is that fair, Mr. Ryan?
Yep, and the thing is, after seeing the note from the planning board, I think we may want to have a little bit more we will have more discussion next time, but I'm not nearly as anxious about it as I was a few weeks ago when I started it. A number of reasons for that. I'll just start off by saying that actually 2 weeks ago today in the morning, I attended a meeting that was with the town clerk, planning board, Jesse Stedman, a member of the Board of Health, and the police chief. I think that was it. And what we did is, I told them what my goal was to try to understand what we could and what we couldn't do under the current regulations. And to try to put together a listing for us so that we would understand what we might and what we might not want to take action on. I think from the town's clerk's perspective, as well as mine, if we were going to do anything prior or for this upcoming town meeting, I wanted to have at least put the stuff on the table for today so that we could get any additional information we might need before the warrant closes shortly after our next meeting. And I know that Linda would prefer that we don't try to rush things through and try to, create lots of problems. Long and the short of it is that what we've been provided is pretty much what I asked for, and actually a lot more detail than I'd asked for. If you look at the memo that Jesse sent to the Board of Selectmen, basically what he's done is he's gone down and listed what we can do via town meeting vote, what has to be town meeting vote and a subsequent ballot, what could be done via citizens petition, and he mentions host community agreement, as well as providing the definitions that have been used in Mass General Law. So it's a fairly comprehensive document that lays out a lot of the stuff. Via town meeting vote, and this is one of the things that I found out, I had been under the mistaken assumption that the planning board was probably planning on, for our annual town meeting, trying to have a zoning article ready. I found out at that meeting that is not the case. Once I found that out, it starts to take a little bit of the pressure off, because once we've established the zoning, somebody could actually come in and start applying for this. At the same time, because of prior town meeting action that we took, we actually have a moratorium in place until, I think it's October, November. So some of this stuff now could possibly get put off, or we may want to consider it, all right? Via town meeting vote, we could do a zoning article. We've got that in process. It's probably going to be at a fall town meeting at this point, based on what Jesse had told us. We could, via town meeting, impose up to a 3% local sales tax on any marijuana-related activities in town.
Commercial.
Commercial, yes. And that's one of the things thank you for mentioning that, Brian. I know some people get upset when they start hearing about maybe regulating marijuana, etc. This is strictly for commercial applications. It has nothing to do with anybody who wants to grow their 6 allowed plants in their backyard, or anything else. This is strictly commercial.
Or using it in their home.
Private consumption.
Private consumption, it has nothing to do with that. We don't have any control over that. What we do have control over is zoning and commercial activities. So we could put, if we wanted to, on the town meeting ballot, 3% sales tax. It just has to pass town meeting. Some new things that I hadn't seen was establish restrictions on signs. However, Jesse's also mentioned that that would generally be taken care of in the zoning. So we probably don't have to do anything with that. We could establish civil penalties for violations, like an open container law type of thing, if we wanted to. I don't think we're ready for that. I'm not terribly worried about that at this point. And then we could restrict the licensed cultivation, processing, manufacturing that is a public nuisance. I'm still not 100% sure what that means, but apparently we can do that via town meeting. Via town meeting vote and a subsequent town-wide ballot measure. So we'd end up having to do both of these. We could prohibit one or more uses, including retail sales, manufacturing, processing, testing, etc. I would say look down further into the memo to see what a marijuana establishment is, craft marijuana cultivator, independent testing laboratories, etc. But what we could potentially do, and it has to be done by both, is town meeting vote and then a ballot measure. We could potentially limit the number of marijuana retailers to fewer than 20% for or 20% of the off-premise liquor licenses. We've got 5 liquor licenses in town. Basically, current law says that it is limited to 20%. So we can have 1 facility in town based on current state law. We could reduce it below that, but if we reduced it to 10%, I suspect that they round up. You're gonna get 1 and only 1.
Can't get a half of one.
Can't get a half of 1.
Can't do it.
And, let's see, limit the number of any type of marijuana establishment to no fewer than the number of medical, to fewer than the number of medical marijuana treatment centers registered to engage in the same type of activity. Since we don't have any medical marijuana, I think that's moot at this point. One of the things, and it's actually since I read this, the next one is it mentions that this isn't something that we would do, but it's something that it has actually been bouncing back and forth. I think everybody has probably heard about the concept of on-site consumption, where you would have a marijuana bar, for lack of a better term, something like that. According to the information that Jesse's given us, the only way, that has to be by affirmative voter action. That means that someone would have to go out and gather, and I think it's around 400 signatures, and then petition us to put it on a ballot. It's not by right at this point. At the same time, I've also seen...
Is this something we could initiate?
You could potentially initiate it. We could potentially initiate it. But at this point, I wouldn't think that I would be in favor of us initiating it.
I just want to know what our options are.
Yeah. There's still a lot of confusion over the on-site consumption, because they've been talking about having yoga studios that you do yoga and you get stoned, and you know, stuff where it would be incidental. They haven't hashed out all the rules. And actually, in this month's Beacon, on the front page, there's something that actually contradicts what Jesse had put down in here. And apparently the MMA is in the process of trying to get it clarified. Originally, I thought everybody was thinking that you could have a pot bar by right, and you would have to exclude it. Subsequent stuff that I've seen says that somebody would have to petition the board to put it on a special election in order to have it, in order to allow it. We couldn't allow it, as far as I know. At the same time, there appears to still be some confusion. I think today is the day that the Cannabis Control Commission actually was supposed to have their final rules. But I'm going to go on the premise right now that until I hear differently, I'm going to go with Jesse's version that somebody would have to start a petition in order to allow that in Stowe. We'll probably find out more information in the next few weeks, but that's not allowed, and where we're grandfathered into the fall, we're probably in better control. And then one of the other things is that once if somebody wants to start an establishment in town, what the procedure is they have to apply to the Cannabis Control Commission, and then they have to hold public hearings, and then they have to enter into a host community agreement with the town, and they have to then also comply with our zoning bylaws. And there's, I believe, a 60-day period where the town gets to respond to the Cannabis Control Commission prior to the commission issuing a license. So, that's the long and the short of it. The other part is that I think you probably saw the note that was sent by Lori, Chair of the Planning Board, suggesting we don't rush into any of this stuff at this point.
So you're not advocating, because that note gave me the impression you wanted to do something for this town meeting, but now you're saying. I hear you saying-
Originally, I was thinking, my original plan was thinking, we're gonna have zoning.
Right,
If we're gonna have zoning,
now I get it.
it's gonna be allowed in. If it's gonna be allowed in, I wanna know what we can and what we can't do. And then discuss it with the board to see if we wanted to take any action. I think that this is a real good start. I'm glad we're doing this now rather than, I'll say, 3 weeks before, you know, a fall town meeting. So, you know, this is a baseline for right now. If anybody else on the board thinks that maybe we should take action, I'm open to that concept also, but I figured, you know, I just wanted to get it on the table. I didn't want to leave it for, and find out that, geez, we missed the deadline to do anything.
Can I make a
One thing, no, Mr. Arn, we're very grateful that you did, and I think it was a great idea. And I know I mentioned earlier that if somebody wanted to put this on town meeting by a petition, curtailing any retail sales, it was up to them to do so. Yes, I'm sorry, Mr.
I thought this was great, because we really ought to focus, it's about time to focus on
Mhm.
what to do and when, and I found their materials really helpful.
Mhm.
So I'm glad you prompted it.
Yeah.
I was thinking, and I'm glad you don't want any action without a full board.
Right.
I was gonna suggest to you, maybe having Jesse and/or the planning board come in and talk about this when we know we have a full board, without maybe me, because I know I'm gone for the next 2 meetings, to talk about what, if anything, do we all have to do now? And the reason I'm concerned about that is I spoke to Jesse, because I've been spending a lot of time with him lately on Complete Streets. And I talked to him about this briefly. It's possible we should think about, or they should think about, extending the moratorium about a month. Because there's some possibility, if something were on if something were on the November ballot, it couldn't take let's say a prohibition was passed, it wouldn't take effect for some period of time, like 30 days. But the moratorium ends at the end of November, so theoretically, there could be a period of a week or a week and a half when the moratorium was over, but the prohibition wasn't in effect. So it might be a good idea to extend the moratorium. And maybe that's something we want to think about for the annual town meeting. I just want to have that conversation.
Yeah, we will. But before we have any further conversation among ourselves, I'd like to hear from our town administrator and especially from our clerk about the practicalities of scheduling things for this town meeting. If you have any thoughts.
I don't have any thoughts with we've got a closing for the warrant date. That holds, unless you want to extend it for some purpose, but I'm a strong proponent of buying time on matters like this. I've read the legislation, and Jesse in part has quoted vague and ambiguous wording, such as that prescription that you were reading. You can't tell. A reasonable person couldn't tell on it. And clearly, there's still a political process going on at the state level on many aspects of this. So my default position would be wait. Now, the matter of whether extending the moratorium is doable, I don't have an objection to that. I would simply state that before I would make a decision on that, and I'm not the decision maker, is that I'd want to have better available information and not do it just speculatively, but that's just me.
That's what I'm suggesting. Don't take my word for it, just
Right.
talk to them.
And the thing is, that's why I wanted to bring it up now, because we have one more meeting before the warrant closes. And, you know, I didn't want to be having this conversation then even, you know. I wanted to get it at least on the table with the three of us. Brian very correctly said, you know, we shouldn't be taking any vote on it since we're down 2 members. But, you know, some of my original thought had been, would it hurt if we, and I would put it, if I were gonna put it on the town meeting warrant and a ballot, what I would do, based on what I know now, is I'd say, all right, let's put a 3% sales tax on anything that comes into town, right? Whether we allow it or not. Let's vote in the 3% tax. I'll leave the bid on the signs up to,
Zoning.
up to zoning and the planning board. Establish a civil penalty. I don't know what kind of penalty I'd want to do now, so let's skip that. Restrict stuff that's a public nuisance. I don't know what the definition of it is yet. I'd skip that for today. Would I maybe put an article on to restrict retail sales? Yes or no? Retail sales only. Next article would be manufacturing. Do you allow manufacturing, yes or no?
But you're not talking about for this annual town meeting.
That's what I was thinking originally.
I would heavily caution against that. I think you're gonna have a much more,
Yeah.
a much larger and in-depth and sustained public
Yeah.
involvement
Mhm.
and anything for the annual town meeting other than
Mhm.
some kind of simple, straightforward statement. I think you're just
Yeah.
inviting.
And the thing
folks
is,
to go
that's
ahead.
it, after the meeting, I think Jesse kind of convinced me that, you know, since we weren't gonna have a zoning bylaw at that point, I'd hold off.
I don't want to reject Mr. Ryan's thoughts out of hand. If we put on for this, and I'm just running this up the flagpole, don't shoot the guy who's running the flag up. The idea is, if we put a very simple question before the town meeting and the ballot, and on the ballot this year, about, do we want to, thank you, Mrs. Stedman. We're just talking about the marijuana regulation.
Come on up.
Come on up. And Mr. Ryan has explained that you're not gonna be ready with zoning proposals for this town meeting.
No.
Okay, that's, yeah.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Okay, we understand that.
Yeah.
But what we're now considering, and again, we're just floating this. If we decide at this town meeting and at the ballot that we don't want retail sales, we don't want industrial production, and we don't want agricultural,
Yep.
and we just put that before the town, this, very simple, do you want to have commercial real estate commercial retail establishments? And they say, and it gets voted down, then you don't have to do any of that zoning bylaws. We don't have to do a lot of these other questions about 3% or what have you. It'll be just an up or down vote on whether we're gonna allow commercial establishments here in the town of Stowe.
Yep, I agree that that is an option. I think where the planning board was coming from that, I mean, that's certainly something you can do. I mean, we have the authority in the state law to do it. I think what the planning board was trying to say is that posing the question in that way leaves a lot of other kind of gray area options out of the picture. So for instance, maybe faced with a yes or no, up or down on prohibiting a retail shop, somewhere in the middle there is a, well, I'm not crazy about it, but if we could potentially regulate it through a special permit, maybe that's okay. You know, so I think what the planning board was saying, there's a lot in the middle here that an approach right now without having a chance to really get out there and talk with residents.
And there might be people who would vote in favor of a ban unless they found out that you can also limit it to one establishment in town. Oh, I don't think one establishment's that bad, it won't be any more than one, okay, I'm not gonna vote in favor of a ban, I'm gonna vote for one. Or they might not vote for it when they find out, oh, you're not gonna have these pot clubs? That's what I'm really concerned about. You know, those, I agree, those layers of gray need to be explained.
On the other hand, and I don't know if this is the case, you can correct me, if, I think most people are gonna make their decision based on, do they want commercial retail establishments selling pot in any.
Right.
I mean, there's gonna be a
Probably right.
strong segment of the population who just says, we don't, you know, if people want it, they can go to another town, we don't want it sold here. And I think that's what most people will make the decision on. And to your point, Mrs. Salvi, those people who would be convinced in the middle, if they saw the gray and they saw the 3% and they saw this, we could, I'm not sure that people are gonna be that engaged and that nuanced about their thinking on this. In addition, if we put it on the ballot and we ban it, retail establishments, agricultural, industrial, at that point, if there's a strong interest, we can revisit the issue on another day. We can lift the ban if we put it before the voters. Is that correct?
I don't see why a future action at town, that's a town council question, but I don't see why you couldn't reverse it taking the correct action. I just don't know though.
I mean, if there's a strong enough,
I don't see the reason to wait or not to wait. If, I'm concerned about, I mentioned the possibility of a window where the moratorium runs out.
it certainly will address that. I don't, your point on that is very well taken.
I think the other thing is, how many people show up to vote at a May municipal election? 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 if we're lucky, whereas the November election is going to, it's a congressional midterm, it's gonna be very, very well attended, and the results much more representative. And if you pass a ban at a May municipal election where 1,600 people showed up, yet the 53.7% of people approved it at the November 16th presidential election, you're always gonna have that argument that the yes is more valid than the ban, and we'll still have the issue.
That's an excellent point, Mr. Salvi, one that I neglected to really think about, but that's why we're
I
having
wanna
this.
get
We're
this
just-
videotape, and I wanna just play on a constant loop where you say that, lull myself to sleep at night.
While you're doing that, perhaps we could ask our town clerk, since she's graciously stayed on, is there gonna be that much of a difference between the expected turnout in May as opposed to the November election?
Oh, yes. I would expect with uncontested races and no ballot questions in May to be under 1,000. And at least 75% or more in November turnout.
So about over 3,000 then. Now,
I have a more basic question. What are we trying to accomplish by aggressively going at the annual town meeting on a ban?
Just so that we don't have to start dealing with these zoning questions and giving the people a vote, but I'm now persuaded that we'd get a more representative turnout in November. So now my question is, rather than have the planning department spend all this time doing up zoning bylaws and all of this and that, can we perhaps extend the moratorium so that we can just take the up and down votes in November? And then, if necessary, work on all these ancillary questions?
So I would say we could try to extend. I know there's been a lot of chatter from planners in the area that have said the AG's office is accepting moratoriums through, I think, December 31st. And so there's a possibility to get a little further down the line, or maybe to get around that issue of that 1 week lapse. I think regardless, the planning board, and I think from my opinion, would still be that there'll be enough chatter after having some of the public forums and just the whole, everything going on, that it would still probably be a good idea for us to have a bylaw in place. Now, the bylaw, yes, some of them can be, this actually is not that complicated of a zoning bylaw to create, so I don't feel like we're throwing away tons of time on something we won't need. I think I think we can use the model that we had with our medical marijuana bylaw and be able to craft something. And I think being able to at least talk about what was in the bylaw might help during that whole discussion period as we march toward town meeting in the fall. So to not have it, I feel like kind of takes away some of the ability to talk about the different options.
And I was just gonna say, and to that goes to Mr. Salvi's point, which is if you're going to give people an up or down vote, explain to them how there is that gray area. Yes, Mr. Ryan?
I think one of the other things to go along with it too is that, I agree with Jesse that we should have the bylaw put in place regardless, right? Even if we did all these articles that I talked about now, and everybody said no, we should still put it in place, because there's still enough confusion in the Cannabis Control Commission that at some point, any one of our prohibitions could get tossed out the window.
Or reversed.
Or
by a
reversed.
future vote.
You know, so what we would wanna do is, fine, you know, we put it in, as Jesse said, it isn't a huge amount of work, yes, it's some work.
It's work, but yeah, it's not
But-
impossible.
And then what we do is we say, look, this is what we're putting in, and it may also clarify it for people too, saying, hey, the only place that you could have a retail shop is up by Shaw's. That's the only place zoned for it in town, all right? Do you want to prohibit it or not? Yes or no? Because there's only gonna be one retail shop because of the 20% rule, et cetera, unless we decide we want to become the pot kingdom and we say that we can have 5 in town.
Leaving aside the relative merits of this question.
Which I wanna do.
And the competing interests and needs that are involved, my experience has shown me, convinced me that you may never get to the merits if they think the due diligence process has been one that's been unnecessary. How often do we hear on any important matter that comes before our legislative body? Well, have you thought of this? Have you done that? Have you done this? And if the answers are, no, we haven't yet, but we assumed, or we're speculating all the rest, even good ideas go down. I think that the town expects us to do the appropriate due diligence, and, I mean, that's my approach in life, and I'll tell you this isn't ripe for any decision-making yet. Even at the state level, because of the uncertainty, the political implications, and between the Cannabis Control Commission and others, I think some dust has to settle here before we start too deeply looking at what ifs.
Madam Town Clerk?
I would encourage you for the November, if you're considering putting questions on the November ballot, that you put it on the state ballot. So we're only handing out one ballot at a time, and they're not having to go through 2 lines to make it easier for the public to make sure they have it. The deadline, I believe, to get it onto the state ballot is August.
So we have some time on that.
But not as much as you would think.
Right, so, and I'll double check on that date, but it could be the end of July, but just
And
thinking of that,
can we, the Board of Selectmen, put stuff onto the state ballot?
yes.
Okay.
We can vote to put it on, the Secretary of the Commonwealth can, deny that request, but we could at least get it on. If not, then we're running 2 separate elections.
Right, and that was one of my, you know, you and I have had that conversation before, that running 2 elections is kind of a nightmare.
Right, and if people don't know what they're voting on and don't see the questions and don't see that and didn't realize they have to get this other ballot, it's a nightmare for the voters.
We'll make sure that nightmare doesn't take place. All right, I've been persuaded. I was just running it up the
Yeah,
flagpole.
no, that's
Now I'm gonna run it
enough.
down the
Yeah.
flagpole. And I wanna give Mr. Salvi last word on this, because he's not gonna have, well, if our inclination is to follow the direction, you'll be around when we take this up again.
Yes. Yes.
So,
I mean, I'll say, if you have a further discussion about this ballot and the moratorium extension, I would be in favor of extending the moratorium, just to make sure that status quo remains until people can take an action.
I was just about to say, what do we need to do if we're going to punt? And there's nothing wrong with punting,
Yeah.
third down and long.
Yeah.
If we're gonna punt to November, what do we have to do to make sure that our rights are preserved?
So I
The-
don't think
the
we have
moratorium?
anything to obviously, until November, we have nothing to be concerned about. We could do one of two things. A moratorium could be one of the different options that shows up on that warrant for the special election. So, you know, who knows how it will turn out. It could be a moratorium to say we need to go forward, or you could do it now.
Do we need
We
to
haven't,
do we
you know.
need to put the moratorium on for the the annual town meeting this May?
You could. I guess what you could do is you could amend what we already have and say that we want to extend it and see if the Attorney General goes for it. I haven't had that discussion with the planning board, but it's possible to do, yeah.
I mean, is that the safer way? I mean, I just want to make sure that we have the.
Yeah, I mean, if they said yes, if they, yeah.
You and Mr. Ryan have worked very hard on this
Yeah.
and trying to figure out our
Justice
options.
works very hard on it. I'm kind of riding his coattails. I'll be the
Well,
first to
all right,
admit it.
whoever's worked very hard on this, I don't want to see all your good work going down the drain, because we haven't
Yeah.
preserved our rights.
I think Jesse's saying you could have it on the warrant of a fall town meeting, let's say in September, and you'd still technically be okay.
But that may not give the AG a whole lot of time to
Right, you
review
may
it.
not find
It
out
might
that
be
you
better
don't
to do
have
the
a-
annual town meeting where
Right.
more people will show up.
Madam Town Clerk,
So any of the filings with the AG's office, amendment to the bylaw, we have 30 days from the closing of the town meeting to get those bylaw revisions to the AG's office. They have 90 days to respond.
Yeah.
but does that
And
apply to
that's typically-
moratoriums?
I don't know whether it's any different, but that is typically a zoning bylaw, a general bylaw change. And if their load tends to be a little lighter in the fall, but they've got all the spring stuff. And I've seen them take up to their full 90 days.
So the thing is, we could do it in a September meeting and ask for an extension to the end of December, and they'll tell us in February.
Well, not quite.
Yeah, all right, but it looks like we're gonna, if we want to consider any of these options, we're gonna have to have a fall town meeting in advance of the November 7th election, or the November general election, correct?
That's correct, for sure.
So, Mr. Town Administrator, what is your thoughts about pushing the moratorium at this town meeting in May? Is that too much?
I would say I'd need to think about that along with.
Well, we've got another 2 weeks.
Well, in 2 weeks I can give you an answer.
Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share with us now?
Sounds to me like the cautious thing to do is to have it on the ballot, the warrant of the annual town meeting.
I tend to agree.
Well, this is not on for a vote tonight. I appreciate everybody's input, and I'm looking forward to the town administrator's input. I mean,
Just to save time, I'll default to these two. How's
why don't you spend some time thinking about it? 'Cause
that? I just did.
He thinks quick.
On a cost benefit, it's easy. It's not worth 2 weeks.
I appreciate that, but we have two other members who will be
Well, then,
consulted in 2 weeks.
that's a reason to
And so
wait.
maybe they would want to hear a more reasoned opinion from the town administrator. But my colleagues do make a lot of sense about getting it, you know, if we're just looking for a 30-day moratorium, getting it on the books now.
Yep, I get it.
And does that pose any real practical problems for the town administration, the employees, or the clerk?
I don't see.
I'm-
This is gonna be simple and straightforward.
It would be, the one question I would have probably for town council would be, if we change the date and we make it for December, can we do it in such a way that if they say no good on December, November is still our date? So, you know, could we write an amendment in a way that said, no, we don't approve December, go back to what you had in November, rather than it's all or nothing on the extension? So that's one thing I would wanna
I'm
consider.
sure it
before
can be
doing that.
worded that way.
Yeah, I just haven't thought about how
I
to do
mean,
that yet.
I
Yeah.
think you'd want to analyze what the possible complications, uncertainties that
Right.
would arise that would require an extension of that.
Yep.
Yeah, well, you'll have some chance, you'll have a chance over the next 2 weeks to well, it's not a full 2 weeks, but you'll have a chance over the next 12 days to discuss with town council and get her input on this, and maybe you'll even hear from various associations, the Attorney General's office, how receptive they are gonna be to these moratoriums. But I think my colleagues are making sense. We should be shooting for the annual town meeting in May if possible.
Duly noted. Okay. One thing, I don't know if you've seen Beacon, the latest copy.
Yes, I admit I have not read through the whole thing. It looks like there's something on the cover I should read.
It actually says that the MMA is asking for clarification
Right.
on the on-site consumption.
Yes, I did know that, so they're gonna probably give some sort of clarification, they said, in the fall.
In the fall.
Yeah. So that may be one of the reasons why the AG would approve an extension, we'll see. It
Yeah.
hasn't all been fleshed out.
Right. What I mentioned to the board here at this point is that we will be going with your interpretation that you wrote down in here that says that if somebody wants on-site consumption, they're gonna have to petition the town to allow it. It's not by right at this point. So no matter what the zoning is or whatever, somebody comes in and asks for it, nope, can't do it, man. Unless and until the Cannabis Control Commission says something that's concrete.
Right. That's a
So-
crucial point. I've got my eyes peeled for it, along with a lot of other towns, so I'm hoping that we'll catch anything new that develops on it.
Yeah.
To
I-
change it.
I read your stuff, and then this morning I'm looking at this, I'm going, oh, hey, it says something different than what Jesse told me, man.
Based on the chatter by my colleagues, if there's more than 1/10 of the number of towns, 300 cities and towns, 351, aren't thinking out loud about this and all of these problems, I wouldn't be surprised if the state doesn't do something, again, to push off some decision-making or to allow some kind of flexibility, because there's just too many substantive issues that haven't been covered.
Yeah, so I realize it's a fluid situation and hasn't solidified as quickly as we'd want it to.
No.
So we appreciate your keeping riding herd on this, and thank you very much for your time.
I appreciate all the hard work
Of
you
course.
put in on that,
Thank you.
Jesse.
We'll
Thank
see you guys
The
again
folks
soon.
will be doing privately on their own property with their methods, so I don't think there's gonna be much of a turmoil one way or the other.
I just want to make sure that the town is apprised of their options and they exercise them if they wish. Now, we've been eagerly looking forward to the town administrator's report.
Well, no. Provided you the narrative first, and then I wanted to just scrub the numbers before I gave you today, but in electronic form, and then there were copies out here in case you hadn't, but there was only 3 pending if you hadn't. But I just wanted to give you status report on the development of the FY19 budget. And basically, I'm going to the baseline of meeting on February 12th, where I essentially issued both the narrative and the full spreadsheet of the preliminary budget, which I won't go through in detail. You all know what its contents were, and I provided the backdrop of what it means and what it doesn't mean. And then 2 weeks ago at our last meeting, I gave you an oral update, and so what I provided you was just a summary page of my spreadsheet report, and it summarizes for you numerically, and I'll highlight some of those changes. I'm not going through all of the details, some of which are still uncertain, but what I was carrying for a plug number from Neshoba, in and by itself made it impossible for me to offer a full budget, so I said that. I now have the number of the assessment for us for Neshoba. So
Have they finalized their?
last night, they essentially finalized it. A week ago, they discussed and debated but didn't vote on the number that I had been given by the superintendent, and that remained unchanged. So with that plug number becoming a real number, I started to backfill. I mean, I was doing the what-ifs in any event, but, so now I have a clearer picture of it. As I said in the narrative, I still have some final decisions to make, but some of the decisions on larger numbers have been filled in, so I'll just go through this page, top to bottom, left to right, okay? So, at the top, on the revenues, very little has changed, but there's been some incremental change. Essentially, the new growth now is 400,000. In February at our 12th meeting, it was 346, so that's a plus for us. The only other change is that some of the transfer for other funds, I've changed. More specifically, though the bottom line number of 800,000 from available funds out of stored assets, more specifically free cash and overlay, the total of 800,000 remains. But what I did is because in discussing with the assessors post our February 12th meeting, some growing concerns about need for overlay reserve because of either current requests for abatements or, more importantly, a pending one, which would be a large one. I agreed that of the 150,000 that they were going to allow me to take as surplus, I'm gonna keep 100,000 of that in the reserve so that they can use that. And then I bumped by 50 in the back page of this document, the overlay reserve amount. And so that then reduces by 50,000 of outlay on the overlay reserve, and I basically distributed it as free cash. So if you look above, you'll see 200,000 free cash as a revenue under operations. And the new figure down below under capital outlay, as I've plugged in from free cash for OPEB, because I'm bumping that to 100,000 from 50, as I had previously mentioned to you. In the end, the total on the board right now is 800,000 from available funds. So that's previously tax appropriation costing the taxpayers nothing. Now, having said that, I have some adjustments in this fiscal year that I'm concerned about. Our snow and ice account. And part of, a big component of our fuel consumption annually comes through all the extra overtime, the vehicles are out and all the rest of it. So, though I've got 800 on the board right now, I may take some of that to offset FY18. It's a choice I can make. I can carry over snow and ice, for example, on the tax recap, some or all of it. At the end of the year, if we have, for example, and consistently we have shown a strong balance from unexpended finance committee reserve fund transfers, which we could at the annual town meeting see where that is, or take a vote, the board can approve at the, when we tie out our books, whatever's remaining from, if the finance committee agreed with it, from unexpended reserve fund transfer, we can apply that. But that's speculative until we get towards the end of the year. So as you know, in past years, I've used free cash to, either in whole or in part, to buy down the snow and ice account. And in this case, I would be applying some of that to include fuel costs, because I don't believe they'll make the year. Now, they could ask reserve fund transfer. I want to get better handles on the figures and then make that determination. But just hypothetically, if I took 100,000 off of that 800,000 and net 700,000 as a revenue through our available funds, where I am right now, and so I'll skip to the bottom line just because it would be helpful to, before people would worry that if I took 100 grand from available funds. Where I am right now, not finished with tweaking the expenditure side myself on a handful of smaller numbers, so they wouldn't be significant, the big numbers are in, is that based on the assessor's current estimate for valuation growth next year, and what I'm showing on the board, I'm showing essentially, I'm 144,000 below a level funded budget. I'm a minus 1.22.
Yep.
So what I'm looking at is 144,000 if I can commit to the original promise of trying to get to level funded, and I was above level funded working my way down. I'm now below. And so what I'm saying is we can accomplish, I can accomplish or offer the same goal that I've been offering, which is a level funded, which we haven't had in a long time, which will significantly reduce the, and I don't want to mention tax rates any further than I have, but it would, a level funded budget would significantly reduce the tax rate based on the growth that the assessors, and it's conservative right now, so it may change some, but I think it may increase, not decrease. So anyway, I'm just trying to pick a sweet spot here. So I may take money from free cash for those two purposes and a third purpose, which is to allow the highway department to fully fund from free cash that ongoing inspection work from the dam that's going on. In any event, I may wanna take some money from what's now assigned to the FY19 budget, but no more than what it would take to still get to level funded.
Gotcha, all right, that makes sense.
And I've got a couple of smaller increases now, so I'm thinking of bumping up further the legal account, given some, as we're getting more activity in expending of legal. It's still gonna be less than this year, but I plugged it at 40,000 instead of 70, coming down 30. I may give 10 back, so maybe it's 50, down from 70. But I'm using 144. And then another 10,000 that may be needed for another purpose. And again, bumping up next year's fuel allotment. I added 10, but leaving aside the heavy winter, but I'm beginning to think that we may be getting those routinely. We've had that since 2015, heavy winter and storms. So I may go another 10 there. I bumped it by 10, I may go 20, based on what I see the shortage from this year as it comes up. In addition, the price of fuel is a little higher, has been trending higher, not largely, incrementally, but still, I'm trying to look ahead, it's a commodity, so it's a little tougher, but in any event, I may bump that. But anything I do, I'm still hopeful that I will net out at a level funded budget. So, those are just the uncertainties I wanted to.
That's on the revenue side. You wanna take some quick questions on that or comments on
Sure,
that?
if you want.
Sylvia?
I only had one, the legal budget. It sounds like you're anticipating, if anything, a delta up. And whereas I would have thought, I mean, I guess I know why, let me see if I'm right. Whereas litigation that we have with a certain individual in the southern part of town has greatly reduced, although that's reduced, the ZBA appeals.
Yeah, they've got a handful of cases.
Yeah.
Everything they decide is getting appealed, and I'm not optimistic. So just the ones that are on the board,
Yeah.
you know, I've got to speculate on what I think the cost for each one and how it works out, but they've had a bad run. And I don't mean that as a criticism, I'm just saying.
I wouldn't say it's a bad run, they just had a number of
No, but
appeals.
that's what I'm saying. We haven't had those kind of appeals, and they've had them back to back on a number of cases. And just to be able to fund those, not knowing how far they go, but knowing some of the seriousness of the people who are appealing, we could be there, and I don't wanna get caught short. In any event, I'm gonna still reduce by 20 grand minimally. It's currently 30, but I gotta take another look and try to quantify it, but I'm just, you know.
We understand your goals.
So it's still,
Brian?
if we can still get there, like I said, I'm looking at 144 below level funding. If we can get to level funding, I'd still be very pleased, and I think folks would be. And so that's where I am on the revenue side.
There's not gonna be any, you were talking about reserve cash transfers, any fat there that can be shifted from one account?
Well,
to
the
the
reserve,
other?
you mean the finance committee's reserve fund?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just don't know what it will be. I'm looking at the last 5 years.
Yeah,
In its appreciable amount, what I would say to you is that I don't know what the snow and ice overage is going to be,
yeah.
but I'm not certain that what I'm gonna contribute out of this, without some help somewhere else, and I'm counting on the reserve fund to plug that hole. And if it doesn't cover it all, it'll be a small incremental amount to carry over on the tax recap. And is to add money so that the fuel account, we can get through the fuel account this year with the highway, and get them the money they need to carry through on.
Okay.
But in any event, it won't be new taxation, it'll be money that I've got on hand that
No,
will,
I understand.
you know.
Yeah, you know, and that's it. I remember we routinely would do that. We'd look at what might be coming up for the reserve fund. Fine, you'd have a little bit, and then you'd move a little bit from there, you know, and you'll do what makes sense, you know, because once the reserve fund's gone, there's nothing left. But if it's at the end of the year and there's no claim on it, it can be used for that, you know, it's.
Yeah, I'm not prophetic, but I look back really
Yeah.
well. And the trending is that we're gonna have money available from the reserve fund. The question will be how much. Year to date, it would say it'd be more rather than less. But the heavy time for finance committee is in the last month.
Right.
right,
So
fiscal year.
you don't wanna be grabbing it all now and then finding out that,
So I might have, for example, the highway look for a reserve fund transfer if they can't get to the annual town meeting, but I'm waiting for the latest on the storm for snow and ice, not snow and ice that we're worried about, but it's the fuel that's been consumed for 3 straight weeks, with a lot of overtime and vehicles running at a level that they typically have, right? So, essentially, the bottom line, total revenues at 32,216,030 remains the same, just that some of the available funds have shifted, and I might have to pull some of that back. So, down under the expenditures, when we first, back in February, when I came through the preliminary budget, and what I've done is given you a summary of my narrative of just the major categories. So the general municipal budget at that time was showing an increase, and general municipal is non-school, non-debt, non-capital, just the operating budgets. So what came in was at an increase originally at 2.18. Came in pretty tight, as I think I commented at February 12th meeting. I was very thankful, particularly to public safety, because they're the 3 biggest, and they came in collectively at less than 0.5% requested increase. I'm extremely thankful. They always find ways to try to hold the line and do more with less. But we also had other objections. We worked hard at reducing our property and casualty insurance and other things, and Council on Aging came in very tight, and a few other of the larger budgets, I didn't have to even take a look at closely, so 2.18 was a tight number going in. A number of smaller departments where there's increases and such, but we had larger departments with much less, or even, so when you take that and the townwide expenses, telephone down, IT down, big numbers where we basically went in there and tightened up some of the budgets there, so it came in at 2.18. Well, now it's at 1.46, so if you look below, so further making cuts and tightening things, and I've got a few smaller tweaks to make, though I don't know, they're not significant enough figures, so we're getting close there, but at 1.46 for non-school municipal is as good as I've had in memory, and it's in large part to the departments that are on their own, tried to come in tight, especially the larger ones. So, in February on the 12th, Neshoba came in at 5.11% as a plug number, which is 18,065,945. I had carried that as a plug. It was one of their early numbers. They knew they were going to work down. Now we're at 17,912,331. That's down to 4.21. The percentage change is important, but the most significant is the amount of money. You know, even at that, we're still 723,000 above the current year, but as a percent, and we got lucky for the first time in a number of years that our assessment increase is less by percentage than the other 2 towns. We're typically leading but our student enrollment is what it had been.
It's not that much of a decrease in real dollars, though. Just noting it.
Well, I mean, from the
From
beginning.
1806 to 18,065,000 to 17,912,000, but it's important.
Well,
Well,
and
that's,
they're not using a massive amount of excess and deficiency, right?
Mhm.
They're not using a lot of excess and deficiency.
They don't have much to use.
I was gonna
anymore.
say,
They got rid of
it's
most of that
expensive.
last
Used
year.
it.
Yeah.
An assessment is a function of not just the school budget, it's also a function of how many kids we're putting there.
Well, anyway, I'll take over $100,000.
Yeah.
You know, it may be insignificant to some, to me.
I didn't say it was insignificant.
Oh. Anyway.
You should have done lunch.
Huh? All right, the Minuteman assessment, which has been a real number from early on, remains unchanged. It's going up 15% from this year at 630 to 727,000. Debt service remains unchanged. We had special articles raise and appropriate. So if you look at the initial number of 504,157, it was still down from the current year, because we had a big year increase in legal and all. You go down that list that we had, and we had a large increase because of the veterans agent. We had a couple of, we had a major beneficiary. Neither of those this year, so those came down. And we're down even further, so we're at 483,907, which is a minus 11% over current year. The appropriate transfers is budget neutral. It is different, but from the current year, but money's already in hand and we just transfer from one account to the next, so it's not budget important to me, it's budget neutral. Now, capital articles is the other big place where we've since the first meeting, when it was, for me, 861,505, which is different than what they carry, because I don't carry certain projects on the list if it's not impacted by the budget. So, Community Preservation Committee, for example, their numbers, okay, because they're not on the budget, they're not in there for me. I'm just, operationally, I'm just looking at those, and the latest numbers now, because Highway, Police Department, and schools, and cemetery, from the original requests, they've all agreed. For example, on the rolling stock schedule for both the police and the highway, the police have agreed to shift their schedule forward, not to buy a year and then come in with two. And highway did the same thing with their request for the loader. And I talked to both the chief and the highway superintendent to make sure that they felt comfortable we could just fee shift forward that schedule a year, and that they wouldn't be coming in. Again, you can't account for unforeseen extraordinary, but that cruiser and that backhoe's in good enough shape, both of them, low mileage, could carry on, so we bought a year, and we pick it up on the same schedule next year. So those pieces were important. The school was thinking they may have to replace the HVAC in the auditorium. It's a condenser repair for 25 grand. Now, I won't editorialize on how they picked that up finally, but all I care about is the number.
Mazel tov.
Is down. So 40% decrease on the board for me, okay, from this year to next year. And that's, from the original request, it's over 400,000 less than I was at 12. So I appreciate the capital planning committee and all the departments that have agreed on their own to reduce the
It's
request.
the department heads, they've been very reasonable. We just say, you know, surely you understand, you know, do you wanna be our friend or do you not wanna be our friend? And they get the message, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's general persuasion, some of it direct and certain, some of it speculative, but, you know, I'm just glad that they've agreed without, you know, necessarily having to work too hard to do that. So in the end, where we are now is that the bottom line for expenditures estimated by me, and this is gonna be close to where we end up, because all I've got is some smaller tweaking to do on some, 30,325,214, okay? That represents an overall 2.28% increase in the budget, including the schools, which is where the larger numbers and percentages are, net 2.28. That's pretty tight. I don't think you could get much tighter than that without unreasonably, you know, so the taxpayer's gonna get a great benefit from that. The departments have, for the most part, many of them anyway, have done that willingly, and we're gonna get a new baseline, which means was the important thing from my perspective. And in 2 weeks, I'll give you the final, but that's, we've come a long way in a short period of time. It's all positive, and I appreciate the help that everybody's given.
Any comments or questions from my colleagues for the town administrator on this report?
Fine job, as usual.
It's great, but I mean, it's gonna be a very tight budget, possibly, it looks great.
I think I echo my colleague, Mr. Ryan, it's a fine job, but it's a fine job by all the people that the town administrator was mentioning, the staff, the departments, and especially capital planning.
And only because of the big dog, Neshoba particularly. It started last year, maybe even before. Reconstituted school committee, new superintendent, new finance director. I've never worked as closely, I don't think I've ever worked this in 25 years, Because the sense I got is they meant it when they said they wanted to know what would be helpful to the three towns, and then they went out and worked it. And these folks have, the superintendent, the chair, the school committee members that voted. Because without them, you know, we could do whatever we wanted to for the rest of our budget. It's only, I control 27%.
Yeah.
That helps when you can influence somewhere else and they work with you, but we couldn't do it without them.
Thank you for cooperating with them, and we thank them for their diligence as well. Anything else? Well, is there anything to keep the town administrator from traveling to the friendly town?
Well, the next one, did you want,
I was gonna ask, do you wanna stay and help out with the Eversource brief?
I don't
Town
believe,
administrator?
I don't believe you need any help, do you? Actually, you're driving that process anyway, so it's,
Well, I'm not driving it, but yes, that's fine.
unless you,
Unless you've got, you think he's necessary?
I mean, I've read the draft brief, I assume you folks have, it's, yeah, I think it's accurate, reflective, it's brief and to the point.
Okay.
Right.
We will release you. Thank you, and thank you.
if not, you can watch it on TV tomorrow.
I haven't missed an episode in so long. Hey,
He never watches. All right, that does bring us to the Eversource petition brief, and as the town administrator said, we all read it. What are our, does anyone have, there's some punctuation things, some typos, but the town administrator, actually, apologize. The town council's been very busy the last couple of weeks. Is there anything that my colleagues have that they wish were added to this brief?
I think it was pretty clear and succinct to the point that, you know, it reiterated our position that we really don't want to see above ground. We think that they should keep it on the rail bed, underground.
That I might disagree with you on, but I'll come to that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Salvi?
I thought it was fine. I thought it could, and this might be a subtle point, I thought she could emphasize a little bit more that our position is that we oppose the overhead. We only favor, and I'm talking about as a board, not individually, we only favor the proposed alternative, the underground one, because we oppose the overhead.
I agree.
And so I don't know that I wanted to take anything out from what she's got, but I wanted her to add something to that effect. That the board opposes the overhead. As a result, they are in favor of the proposed alternative, something like that.
Yes, now we're getting into some real nuances. I would have been happy, or I would have suggested, not starting out with that, but ending up with that, saying, and we just want to say real strongly how much we oppose the overhead and yada, yada, yada. Now, let me step back for a second. I assume that you guys don't want to revisit the issue of whether we should be doing we should be joining the other towns in their efforts to put this under the roads, existing roads?
No.
No.
Okay, well, at least I raised the issue.
Although I want to hear from the people who were kind enough to say,
Well, that's a good point. Do we want to stop here? Because
Yeah.
we did have some correspondence, I want to note that. It was reviewed by the members who are here. It's the steering committee for the Gleasondale Village Association. So with respect to just that one issue, does the town oppose any energy transmission line along the MBTA right-of-way? And prefer, or should we prefer the under-the-road option? Is there anyone, would you like to address that? And when you do, just please state your name and address for the record, and also especially for our administrative assistant who will be doing the minutes.
Hi, my name is Laurel Cohen, 481 Gleasondale, and our preference is under the roads, mainly because this area of Gleasondale, where it does come through, is part of they call it a Zone 2 wellhead protection area. This water eventually can filter into our wells, and the more trees they have to cut, and the more herbicides they put out, the more chances of it getting into any of our wells. So if they go in the roads, they don't have to do all this spraying. They spray annually along their routes because they want nothing to grow back to protect all their equipment. So to us, it just makes more sense to put it in the roads and keep our water protected. Our worst case scenario is overhead. That's even more cutting and more spraying, aside from the visual effects.
I don't know if it'd be more cutting or more spraying, but certainly
It's
it
a wide,
is.
it's
It
a
is.
much
So
wider.
wider, yes, you're right, sorry.
Yeah.
I see what you're
So
saying.
those are our reasons. We realize we're a small piece of this project.
But very
We are
important.
down there, it's important to us.
It's important to us too.
It's our water. We don't know what you're gonna do if all of our water eventually could get tainted.
Thank you.
So that's where we come from.
Would your companion like to?
Sure. My name is Eve Fisher, 6 Sudbury Road. I'm also part of the Personnel Village Association. I have a question for you. Do you really, so if I understand, you prefer using the existing, you would prefer not using the roads as a town?
I could be persuaded to go the other route, the under the road route. I've heard arguments, and I've read the briefs from Protect Sudbury, and they do make some good points. I mean, the environmental damage to Hudson and Sudbury is far greater than it would be to Stowe, but only because we have such a small piece of it. That doesn't mean that the small piece that we have wouldn't potentially be subject to the kinds of damages and injuries that they're talking about. So I'd be willing to think about that. I'm not sure my colleagues would, but you can ask them.
Was that your question?
Yes, it is my question. Yeah.
So, I just wanted to react to what you said. I thought what you said was extremely thoughtful and well presented, and I just wanted to express my appreciation for that. Speaking personally, so the board's position has just been that we're opposed to the overhead, and that was the only official position we took. So I'll speak personally. You focused on the herbicides. I think that's the right thing to focus on. I've been to some forums where people focus on things like electromagnetic pulses,
Yeah.
and I just don't get that. The herbicides, frankly, from what I understand, they are using only herbicides that are on the state's approved list. They are using them, according to their documents, they are using them in a manner that is approved by the state. And they have minimized, or at least pulled back on the amount of herbicides that we're going to use as opposed to manual cutting. So they've said that they're going to increase manual cutting. Without evidence that I shouldn't believe them, or that the state has made some horrible mistake by including terrible things on its approved list, I feel like I have to rely on that. Personally, and not speaking for my colleagues, I also really, really value the possibility of enhancing the rail trail. You address that? I think it could be a really important asset to the town. And so for that reason, yes, I personally do favor the underground in the rail bed option.
Would there be a big cost to the town of Stowe if it was under the roads? Would we have to pay for, I don't know, police detail, or would be incredibly inconvenient?
I assume we'd have to pay something for details.
Well, one of the things that I know when I talked to the highway department about the possibility of under the roads, right? And we haven't taken a position whether it's better under the roads or not, but I do know that the highway superintendent, I'll say, had heartburn
Yeah, sure.
about tearing up the roads, even though they would have to, you know, fix them up. It would be incredibly inconvenient for quite a bit of time. The other thing is, and because I'm sorry, it would also, in the long run, cost more. And my understanding, the cost difference, I believe, and I'm very, very rough numbers, I believe it's about 50% more to do it on the road than it is on the rail trail.
But Eversource would pay for that. Not
Well,
the town of Stowe.
the thing is, we would all pay for it
Yeah,
at some
by an
point.
increase. But, and we don't really know what route they would take if they took the roads.
They were
Okay.
talking about coming down Sudbury Road.
Okay.
They've given an approximate route.
Yeah.
So Sudbury,
Yeah.
then a little bit of 62.
I think what we don't know is we don't really know how long the
Yeah.
roads would be impassable. We don't know what time of year.
Yeah.
You know, God forbid it's in the fall, apple picking.
Probably.
I mean, speaking personally, I'm not so much against the under the road. Like I said, I see an advantage to
To the rail trail.
to the rail
Sure.
trail. And on the herbicides, I think you're focused on exactly the right things, the thing I'm focused on, but it's not exactly a pristine path now. And it's right by that farm. And what do all farms use, unless they're organic? They use herbicides and pesticides. I have to believe
They're-
you.
It's actually a beautiful, you're talking about the
For Julian's.
yeah,
Julian's.
but if you go into the swamp
Yeah.
and then over the Assabet to I mean, this winter when it was super cold, I was able to cross country on the Assabet there. And
Over the
it's
Assabet.
beautiful, it's really wild, it's incredible.
It's
Yes,
very nice
yes,
out
no,
there.
no,
It's
I-
mysterious, it's an incredible asset for us to
I have
have
pictures.
that right here.
I have pictures.
Yeah.
It's got the rail bed in it, but yeah, I think this is not on the side of the Aspen you're talking about.
But it's really cool. I mean, it's
I've heard input from the other towns about the very vulnerable nature of some of their land along this right of way. I assume it's gonna be the same for Stowe. I can't, yeah, and I should also add, as long as we're talking about the general position, the Protect Sudbury brief especially makes the point that this entire transmission project isn't necessary.
Yeah.
And that's something we could also take a position on. But I'm not sure that I'm either willing to disagree with my colleagues after hearing them on either one of those points, that it's, that we should say in this brief that and I don't think our town council would have enough time to research all the briefs on that point. And I also don't think, they feel strongly that the rail trail, the MBT right away option is the best. Do I understand that correctly?
I actually think that the right-of-way is the best option. And, you know, I lean towards above ground to begin with, and I changed my mind, all
Good.
right?
glad.
You know,
Thank
and what I did is I actually walked the whole section, or a good chunk of the section. I spent a couple hours out there last fall. And, yep, I modified my position on that, so it's,
And we completely agree, having a rail trail would be wonderful.
Mhm.
The herbicides are are somewhat terrifying.
Let's talk about that for, in just a minute, but so, and so our position is going to be consistent with the resolution we passed, almost 2 years ago, or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
No, just last year.
I think it's true.
Or is it 2 years ago? I'm getting old. 2 years ago that, and I think at that point, we didn't take a position on the underground road. I'm not sure it was fully developed, but we said, if you're gonna do anything, make sure it's underground. And that's still our,
You know, it's, I think that the idea of this is just to get something else on record. We know that we're a little bitty piece of it, but what we wanna do is we wanna stay in the game so that they listen to us. And we're essentially reiterating the position that we took 2 years ago, or a year ago, and ongoing, that, you know, we wanna make sure that they keep whatever they do underground, and,
I do think, speaking for the, keeping in mind the point of view of the institution
Mhm.
as opposed to the individual, I do think it would be appropriate maybe to give some feedback to town council to make clear the main point is we oppose overground. Because we oppose overground, and this isn't overground, we're in favor of this. Oh, and by the way, it has these added.
and I'm happy with that.
okay, so the position of the board is that we would support an under the ground along the existing MBTA right-of-way. If the board was inclined to do that. To Mr. Salvi's point, I think, this is what I was getting at earlier, I think we should add a paragraph. And this has gotta be filed tomorrow, there's not that much we can do with it. But I think we should add a paragraph saying we're strenuously opposed to an to a transmission line above the ground.
That is the main point.
Yes.
And so that should be a
We
paragraph
can
in
all agree
here.
on that.
Well,
Let's do that.
you know, one of the things that that they already do mention in here, an underground line will reduce the visual and environmental impacts of the project by reducing the amount of clearing required as compared to overhead lines, and will eliminate need for
Yeah, that's
towers.
kinda in the absence. Something that says an overhead line would be an unnecessary eyesore and
Yeah,
imposition
you know what,
on
you're
the
right.
community.
And it would be depth, just one paragraph, maybe bold it, the introductory line, but the town of Stowe
no overhead.
opposes any
Yeah.
overhead,
So can you give her that feedback?
if you'll trust me.
That's a big if.
Well, if you want, I can CC you on the email.
That's okay.
If you burn us, Brian, will we call you?
Yeah.
That's not a threat,
I
that's
trust
a
you.
reward.
I
All right.
trust you.
No, I'll CC Mr. Salvi.
I just wanted you to know that what you said
Yeah.
was appreciated, the tone that you took, and the thoughtfulness was very much appreciated, and that it was listened to. I personally, I may disagree, I may not reach the same conclusion, but I very much appreciate it, and the way
Thank
you
you.
presented it.
As we all do. Secondly, and she might need an extra day, and I don't think they should have a problem in getting it if, because of the weather. But I would like to add a paragraph about the herbicides, about something that, the herbicide use has to be strictly controlled and minimized to the greatest extent possible. I don't know if she can pull from the record that, but I would like a paragraph on that as well.
Well, I think the Conservation Administrator is my wife, full disclosure. I think they already addressed that, so what Barbara could just say is, and I certainly don't feel qualified to go into the sort of detail they did, she could reiterate that or refer to it.
She could, that's fine. And then if she's already referenced their position as well, then she should reiterate that. But I think it should be in this brief, because if they have oral arguments, you don't wanna be foreclosed from touching that because it wasn't in the brief. And I think that's a very, very important point. It's something that the board has been mindful of, every one of us, all along. And if it takes, I know town council's burden, I know the deadline's tomorrow, maybe she can ask for an extra day just because of the weather. And because we had to postpone our board meeting for 2 days. I'm sure they'd give her a couple of days on that.
I have one more question. I mean, does it mean that it could be a patchwork of solutions? It could be Sudbury would have it underground, under the road, and when it arrives in Stowe, it would be under the rail trail? Do you know? Or it would be one solution
I don't think,
all the time?
I'm sorry, Mr. Ryan?
I was just gonna say, they're talking about bringing it in through Sudbury Road. If they bring it, it would come down State Road in front of the Fire
Right.
Academy, I believe.
Yeah.
Then come down, and I'm not sure exactly where it goes from there. So it's not like it's gonna wind over and then go through that, you know, a small section of the rail trail.
No.
It would be, coming in a totally different way,
If it was under the road.
if it went under the road.
Yeah.
That's my understanding at
Okay,
least.
so it will not be a patchwork following different towns?
No, they're not gonna put up towers in Stowe.
Yeah,
The one.
one
isn't
tower
that
in
a-
Hudson, under the rail trail in Stowe.
I
and
think
then
there was
on the
even a
road.
possibility that if they went above ground,
Mhm.
that there wouldn't even be a tower in Stowe.
I don't remember,
Be
okay.
on
that's
each
it.
side of.
Yeah, one on each side of Stowe.
I echo my colleague, Mr. Ryan's thoughts that it is impractical. I haven't ever heard that as a possible. In fact, I did ask, you're not gonna put it above ground here and underground there.
Right.
And when they came before us, I mean, that was 2 years ago, but they said, no, what we do for one, we do for all. But also keep in mind, if they did it under the roads for the other two towns, that would kind of destroy the utility of the bike paths.
Yeah.
So,
Maybe we can have a bike path without herbicides, no matter what.
Well,
goats.
Yeah.
Goats are the
We'll
answer.
see.
Perfect.
so, what do my colleagues think of my suggestion that there should be a paragraph about herbicides, and maybe even a line about,
Let's not get too
Yeah,
wild,
I
Brian.
think I definitely want you to CC me now.
Yeah.
I was going to, Mr.
Let's just say the one paragraph about, if Tom agrees with this, the one paragraph about emphasizing that we don't want
Overhead.
the overhead.
Absolutely.
And
That's
then
our position.
at least a sentence incorporating by reference the comments of the Concom on the herbicides, and saying that that's important to us too.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yep, I'm good. I'm fine with that.
We appreciate whatever you can do.
Well, again, don't have any reason to think they're lying. So if they're using state-approved chemicals in a state-approved way, we're gonna trust that.
Yeah.
That's
And to
correct.
your point too, they're probably using a lot more on a farm that's right next to it.
But one thing that wasn't touched upon in the other briefs, because they're taking the position that either they don't want the transition line at all, and so we're the only ones who really can address this, because they're taking the position, either do it under the roads or don't do it at all. So we're the only ones who can really bring this up, and this should, and again, maybe an extra sentence, one extra sentence, Mr. Salvi, that there should be mitigation costs set aside to monitor the use of the herbicides and the quality of,
I think we're getting way more into the substance of it, I don't even know what that means.
monitor the herbiciding or the use of chemicals to control growth. Again, as I said, we're the only ones who are even mentioning this.
I don't feel like I have the expertise to start asking for specifics. I am definitely comfortable in referencing and incorporating by reference what the Conservation Commission has already submitted.
Mhm. I agree.
I don't know that I feel comfortable going beyond that.
I'm good with where I think we left it. We don't want them above ground, and,
Application of herbicides should be careful in consonance with the Conservation Commission's submission.
Yep.
I would like to be a little stronger, but I'll defer to you gentlemen.
Well, as you've said, we've brought it up we can, now that we've mentioned it, if it comes to it and we're terribly worried about it, we can,
This is our last shot.
oh, but you were talking that because we've now mentioned the herbicides in conjunction with our prior stuff, we could argue it in court if we wanted to.
Well, I heard it before the board, I said, I hope so.
So, but I'm good with just the, what we just discussed.
Because, and I'll be frank with my fellow townspeople and my colleagues, I'm concerned that the other two towns are so busy trying to hit a home run, they're missing what Mr. Salvi correctly points out is the real issues here, which is if you're gonna do it either below ground or, God forbid, above ground, it's the maintenance of the it's the maintenance of the vegetation that should be the real concerning item. And that, I think,
If you wanna suggest to Barbara that she put in a sentence that she's comfortable with, that somehow preserves our right to ask for mitigation, that's fine. I'd be surprised if that isn't already in the Concom's letter.
when you get, I'm gonna go home tonight and write Barbara this. You can see my CC. and
Yeah.
You can check to see if it is.
No,
before you get home.
I don't want, I think on anything, it's dangerous for the Board of Selectmen to be telling town council what to put in a brief. Whatever goes in has to be her words.
Of course, and
And
this is,
what, well,
this is just a suggestion. Well, you could, I'll tell you what, you'll see my CC. If you think that I've gone beyond what we've discussed or beyond what's appropriate, you can throw your 2 cents.
I understand what you're trying to do, I think. You're trying to preserve our right to ask for mitigation.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but I think she can come up with a way to say that. I don't wanna get into, saying, we want mitigation such as, I wouldn't.
No,
do that.
no. Of course not. But again, the problem I have with the other two towns' approaches is that they're just hitting for the fences.
They're not making arguments in the alternative.
And they're not making, not that I've seen, maybe I haven't been reading carefully enough. Maybe I haven't read them all. And maybe once we get this in, I'll have a chance to review them all before oral argument. But, and that's assuming we want to send anyone for oral argument, and it would be by town council, don't get me wrong, but I just don't want to foreclose those. Fair enough?
Yep.
If you're gonna read every one of those emails that I've seen come across, you
Not-
are a better man than I.
Not everyone, just the briefs, and I started them, I read the Protect Sudbury, but it's just, it's concerning to me that they're not addressing the real issue that, as Mr. Sally pointed out, should be most concerning to us. Because I don't think, if it doesn't get built under the roads, we're gonna have to live with this. And that's what maybe they should have been thinking about, the modus vivendi. Well, I think we've spent enough time, I think I have my colleagues' input enough, and we also have our input from the town, the Gleasondale Association, thank you again,
Thanks for coming out.
and thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see, okay, and I made some, you can look over my punctuation, or my typo corrections. Anyway, we now turn to liaison reports, and perhaps my colleagues would like to be brief.
I was gonna say, I don't think it's fair to share my wisdom and knowledge with you guys without my other colleagues here, so.
Well, bear in mind that Mr. Salvi will not be here for the next 2 meetings,
Oh.
so he's going to be bereft
You can email me.
of your input.
Yeah. No, I think most of my liaison
wisdom.
reports really would have related to the storms, fire department, and highway, so we pretty much covered that already, so.
Well, thank you.
So, brief enough?
Library, we already discussed that they want a meeting about commercial C, capital planning, as covered in the budget. The amounts requested by the departments are greatly reduced. I think the big changes are the police decided to forego an additional cruiser this year. The highway department decided not to ask for a backhoe, but I think that's just postponed. They're just gonna request things next year. Okay. Neshoba's initial request for a new HVAC system at Hale, which was estimated at $150,000, was reduced to a compressor repair for about $26,000. Is that about right, Julianne? And then, and I think you'll be glad to hear the cemetery department has withdrawn its request for $50,000 for design funds for a new building. So those were the 4 big reductions in the capital plan. Complete Streets has been meeting, no exaggeration, 2 or 3 times a week at this point. We have a list of 111 projects. And there was a public forum last night. It wasn't publicized as well as everybody would have liked. Of course, the storms affected attendance. It wasn't that well attended. Though there were some residents, primarily from Foxborough Road and Packard, and I thought it was a very good discussion. The committee now has to finish its prioritization of those 111. You don't do 111 in a year. You don't do anywhere close to that in a year for $400,000. We have to start prioritizing things. Again, Complete Streets is primarily about pedestrian, bike, safety. It's a little bit different than traffic. And that's it. That's all I'm saying.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate all the work that you and Police Streets are doing.
I'm enjoying it. I'm glad that I am no longer employed full-time, or else I couldn't go to these meetings, but I happen to have quit my job at the right time.
I think
You just had to
retired.
throw that in.
Retired is-
Semi-retired.
Yeah, you just had to throw that in so somebody would think you got the boot for something, right?
Just to drive Deb crazy.
Yeah, I've been attending finance committee meetings, I've been attending cemetery committee meetings. They understand about the 50,000, my mausoleum will never be built.
50 could not come anywhere close to covering costs.
To doing me
Suitable.
justice.
I say we go down to the highway department, just get one of the old barrels for you, and we'll take care of that.
That might be appropriate too. But I think anything I could report has been filtered through all the discussions that we've had tonight, so I'm not gonna add anything. I'll just ask for a final motion.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? That's unanimous consent.
Thank you again for coming.